So today is August 16th, which means that in just over a month, I hear on September 20th, it's the Canadian election. And Jahao, I hear you're eligible to vote in that. Is that right?
Yes, sir. This will actually be my first time voting. Can you believe it?
That's crazy. So is the minimum voting age there also
Yeah,
18?
it's. I mean, it's 18 in most of the world, except for I think like, well, of course, in countries who don't have elections, right? But I think like I don't know, some countries in the Middle East. I'm pretty sure. But I digress.
Yeah, and so what's the election like? I'm relatively uninformed on Canadian politics, but is it expected to be close? Who's expected to win?
Well, this is actually a well, first of all, right in Canada, it's a parliamentary system with the prime minister, and in Canada, the prime minister is granted the constitutional right to call an election whenever you know whenever he chooses, as long as it's before the set election date, right? So the last election was in 2019. The next one was set to be in 2023. But Justin Trudeau, the current prime minister, has called an election for I think 40 days from now, right? So October, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, he has chosen, and I as a Canadian citizen, I will be eligible to vote, being 18 and having citizenship. So we won't talk about what parties there are, but should be pretty exciting.
Yeah, and very briefly, would you want to? I'm also very uninformed on this, but what incentive would Trudeau have to call an election early? Is it just solely for political advantage, or are there other reasons
Well, I
for
mean,
it?
yeah, it is basically right the reason why they call elections. Really quick, you know, debrief on Canadian politics. Well, I mean, these sorts of elections in general, obviously not transit related, but basically what happened in 2019 is that Trudeau lost his majority. So that means that he holds, from 2019 to now, he holds a minority government, which basically means that he has a minority of seats in the parliament, and all the other parties combined control more seats. So that means that if Trudeau wants to get any legislation passed, he obviously needs 50% or more. So he needs the approval of at least one other party, no matter what. It doesn't matter which one, but he needs the approval of another party to be able to pass any of his legislation, right? And this is obviously nobody wants a minority; they want a majority, right? They can pass whatever. And so because the polls are looking quite nice for Trudeau now, he is calling an election, hopefully, so he can get that majority back.
Yeah, and so I'm interested in a lot of in electoral geography. So before I ask about like which areas vote for who, I'm just curious. So like, does Canada function the same way as say Norway, where you have a minority government where you form coalitions with other parties? Is
Yeah,
that true in Canada? And if so, which parties is he in a coalition with, and are they expected to stay on
yeah.
with
So that's
him?
a good question, and the answer is no. In Canada, there are no formal party coalitions, right? Um, Basically, of all the parties, left wing and right wing, they're it really depends, right? So even though Trudeau's party is called the Liberal Party, there are many, many, many times where he, works together with the Conservative Party to pass a piece of legislation, right? There's no such thing as formal party coalitions. Um, a coalition government has never occurred in Canada. Um, and yeah, I guess there Canadian politics certainly does have its quirks, but you were saying like about the electoral geography.
Yeah. Well, I have that question too, but I also just it made me think. So this may sound really dumb, but how is Trudeau able to become the prime minister if they don't have like a majority
Well,
of the support in
well, he
parliament?
he he holds the he holds a plurality of seats. So he is the
Oh,
yeah
okay, that
he is
makes
the
sense.
party who has the most seats, right? So I think now he has like two. What are the exact numbers? I don't know. He holds like 170 ish. No, that's not right. He holds like 150 ish. But and the conservatives hold like 120 ish, right? You need like 170 for majority, so he's like 20 seats short or something. So because he's short of a majority, he needs other parties to help pass legislation. But because he holds no more, the liberals hold more seats than any other party. He is the leader, right? The boss of the Liberal Party is the one who becomes the prime minister. In this case, Mr. Trudeau.
Mhm. Yeah, so that's interesting. And when it comes to electoral geography, is it similar? Like, do most rural areas vote conservative, and or most of the urban center is more liberal or even leftist leaning? But the interesting thing I noticed, at least in the 2019 returns, it looked like Nunavut and a lot of the Northern Territory and just land in general voted for the New Democratic Party, which would isn't necessarily surprising to me, but at least uh, the equatable parts of the states, I guess, maybe Alaska, is heavily conservative, and I'm curious what those dynamics are like. Like, it really what determines like who votes for which party?
Well, obviously, like I said, we won't be getting into the general policies of each one, right? But I will say that generally, it's quite similar to other countries. For example, the U.S. or the U.K., where generally, right, the conservative party does well in rural areas. Generally, the Liberal Party does well in the cities, and the New Democratic Party, well, it's a more, shall we say, it's a more left leaning party. So they generally do better with, for example, very urban areas, college towns, for example, and generally, for example, with many indigenous communities, right? But these are
Hmm.
obviously gross generalizations. It'd be impossible, to talk about them all. Plus, this is not Canadian politics talks. This is transit talk after all.
Yeah, and so considering transit, we had envisioned, I believe, to discuss JetBlue's new service to London, which
Yes.
launched last week.
Yes.
Uh, and I believe also, it may be 2 weeks ago now, that the UK got rid of their travel requirements. So that really helped JetBlue get off the ground. And now they're running flights to London. So it's very exciting times for JetBlue, especially because there was a lot of uncertainty at the start of the year as to whether these flights would start, especially with COVID. But certainly the CEO, Robin Hayes, seems very optimistic about the future. What do you think?
I mean, it's certainly a change of pace, right? JetBlue's main focus, JetBlue's main, operations are to and from. Well, first of all, the transcontinental, so to and from New York, like New York, Boston, Fort Lauderdale, and West Coast cities, San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, Las Vegas, and Seattle, but also to and from New York and Boston and Caribbean islands, right?
Yeah, because they have a lot of the leisure flights
Yeah, they
in the
do.
East Coast,
They
right?
do. Like a main part of their service is capturing the especially in the winter, right? The tourists who want to escape the frigid hells of Boston and New York's winters to Grenada or Saint Martin, right? So I don't know. I guess
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, it's very much a change of pace, for the airline especially, and maybe even for the market too, because JetBlue does things very differently, than many other airlines, and there's a lot to talk about. But I first want to consider just like just generally like their choice of aircraft, which I believe they're using A321 LR or Neo LRs, which is an interesting plane. I did hear in an interview from the CEO Robin Hayes that many people have came up to him with concerns that it's not long enough for the route, and that on flights back to the U.S. with headwinds, it may need to divert. But that seems to be a minimal concern. Uh, what do you think about the choice of aircraft that JetBlue chose for this
Well, here,
route?
let me. These are some statistics, right? The LR's range of up to 4,000 nautical miles is made possible by 3 additional center fuel tanks, and the aircraft delivers 30% fuel savings and nearly 50% reduction in noise footprint compared to previous generations of aircraft. JetBlue is also the global launch partner for the new Aerospace by Airbus cabin, bringing long haul style to the A321 for the first time ever. So, I mean, in terms of choice of aircraft, range shouldn't, certainly isn't a problem, right? Because it's within range, right? Um, I I I I I suppose. Actually, I'm not sure. Does JetBlue already have LRs in operation?
Well, they do now with these London flights, and they might be operating some long haul flights. But when it comes to aircraft, especially, it's very notable that this is the first narrow body flight between the U.S. and the UK. Of course, Air Canada flies a lot of 737 Maxes from the northeast, I guess the east part of the country. But for the U.S., this is certainly rare.
For sure. I mean, yeah. Well, I like you said, North Air Canada. Oh, back to Canada, right? Um, well, a lot of people often forget this, but like the most eastern parts of Canada, like Newfoundland, they're in their own time zones, so it's not even Eastern time, right? It's close. It's much closer to the UK, so it only takes like what 4 hours to fly from like 4 or 5 hours to fly from, you know, Newfoundland to London. But that's not the case with New York and Boston, right? Actually, have you just side tangent? Have you, Jack? Have you flown New York to London before, or vice versa?
No, I have not. Um, at all.
Have you flown
I have
to and from either New York or London?
I have flown into JFK, but it was from San Francisco and not from Europe.
So for basically, well, is that almost the? It's not almost the same.
It's a similar distance because the flight back from New York is close to 7 hours, but it's still going to be longer than or shorter than the flight back from
Mm,
London.
mm, mm, mm. Have you ever flown to and from London?
Well, it's a long story. I've never flown into Heathrow, but I used to live in San Diego, and of course, we lived bordering to a super rich town, so that we had friends who were renting a private jet, so they offered to have us fly on that from Farnborough Airport in London. So I believe we flew into Farnborough from like Spain or somewhere. I don't remember exactly, but I've been to Farnborough Airport, but not Heathrow.
Hold on, private jet into Farnborough,
Yeah, exactly.
bro. That's crazy. Oh my god. How rich? How did you get such rich friends?
Well, this town, Rancho Santa Fe, is very much known for having a lot of people who inherit money from their parents who die, which was pretty much the case with this family we were with. I mean, they're not really as much as victims to that, but the town itself is just super rich. Uh, and actually, I regret that decision because I would have much preferred to fly commercial and experience what it's like to fly to Heathrow, and I didn't have any control over the decision
Wait,
making.
hold
But
on, hold on, hold on. That's such that's such like that's such a rich thing to say. Man, I would really like to see what it's like to not be in a private jet and fly where all the masses fly. But wow, I didn't know you flew into private jet into Farnborough. That's amazing.
well, also a short tangent. I also hated the Farnborough experience because we had to drive probably 90 minutes into the city center in a like a taxi, which as someone who hates cars and generally does not like long car rides in the back seat of cars where I can easily get car sick. Farnborough is not a transit accessible airport at all, which also did not was not enjoyable for me.
Mm, I see. Yeah, I guess I'm looking at the map. The train stations are quite far from the airport.
Yeah, but anyway, back to the discussion of JetBlue. It's very notable, like we've mentioned, that they're using a narrow body plane on a route that I believe can be up to 8 hours on the way back.
Well, what's more,
Um,
what's even more interesting is that they're flying to and from. Well, it's not just. Well, they're flying to and from both. If I got this correct, they're flying to and from both Heathrow and Gatwick, right? So,
yeah. So yeah.
hmm
Mhm.
so I mean, at Gatwick, this will certainly be, it won't be unusual to see wide bodies there. Sorry, narrow bodies there. But at Heathrow, I guess it will be more of a sight per se, because I think now, another what's important to consider, right, is that now, right, the demand is much lower than usual because of some reason, right? And we don't know. There's something going on that's like worldwide and is stopping people from traveling. I don't know what it is. Do you know what it is, Jack?
I don't. I heard a rumor that maybe American Airlines is spreading this Delta
Ah,
variant. But
Delta. Oh, is there a United and American variant too?
I haven't heard of one, but I wouldn't be surprised if it popped up.
The United variant. No, but obviously, air travel is down, so I guess they would be able to fly this route, this narrow body in. But I'm just imagining, right? Like, once air travel picks up back to normal, when flight slots at Heathrow are just so in demand from, you know major major airlines from across the world. I'm just wondering, will this route be able to be sustainable throughout post COVID even? Because again, it is being operated right now because the UK has relaxed travel to and from the United States.
Yeah, I mean, I'm personally am not really concerned about the route being sustainable because if after COVID, the route has, I want to say close to 1 billion passengers per year on
Mm-hmm.
it. Like it's heavily trafficked, so JetBlue is not going to have any problems filling their
Mm.
planes. And I think smartly for JetBlue, they have these slots in the first place at Heathrow because airlines backed out of them during COVID. And it's not like JetBlue gives them up once COVID ends. So like they have the slots for the long term. The demand is still like not horrible right now. I mean, it is going to be a lot harder for them to fill seats to the U.S. because there's a lot more barriers to entry,
Mm-hmm.
except if you're American,
Mm-hmm.
that is. But like they've got things going for them, and I mean, of course, British Airways is going to be able to make way more money because they can fit more people on their planes and have more premium seats. But JetBlue is certainly not going to be in an unsustainable position after COVID.
Mm-hmm. So actually, yeah, that's interesting. Let's talk about the actual experience on board. Um, so actually, what kind are they going for? Are they going for, because JetBlue in itself, right, is a more is effectively a low fare airline as they pitch, right? Um, and so will they be operate basically will they be operating more as a more luxury, as a more upscale experience as British Airways does, or will they go, for example, EasyJet or Ryanair style?
Well, to that regard, I think they're very much in between, and I don't think there is a binary answer. And
Which one will be
actually,
closer to then in that case?
well, I wouldn't actually, in my opinion, I wouldn't consider British Airways the most luxury
Well,
option.
obviously.
I, I would think actually that I mean, depending on aircraft, Delta probably is pretty nice, as is, and United's Polaris is also quite nice as well, and even yeah, I would say they're closer to the luxury side. Now, of course, JetBlue is very well known for having good service, good quality for lower prices through not operating lounges, having lower fuel costs, having lower employee paychecks because they have less tenure. There's a lot of ways JetBlue has gotten around charging less, but at the same time, their product is really good. They just introduced this new Mint suite for the specific plane, so they have an upgraded first class, which is in a 1-1 configuration, which is going to be a lot more competitive than British Airways' old business class, which I believe is still operating. So they have a lot going for them in attracting kind of everyone because their economy is also cheap. Like according to Bloomberg, that you can get one way flights for like $202 one way.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah,
not
yeah,
like
yeah. It says here on routers. Sorry, it says here on Reuters too. Round trip economy tickets will start at $599 for U.S. travelers.
yeah. So that it's not like it's expensive and you get so a lot of quality. Like they have, I believe, 33 or 34 inches of legroom. You have the live satellite TV. You have the free Wi-Fi. You get meals. It's not like they're sacrificing anything like Norwegian or Ryanair or the like of that.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it says look fares for JetBlue's Mint class, right, which feature 24 lie flat private suites, right? Um, Starts at 1,979. It significantly cheaper than traditional prices by rivals, which I think I definitely agree with. Yeah, it's not. This is not the Ryanair experience at all. JetBlue, even with the routes it currently operates, right, it's not comparable to Ryanair or EasyJet in that regard. Um, although here's another thing to consider, which may which is it may be something which will happen, it may not be, right? But basically, since JetBlue is introducing the new Mint class on the New York to London, do you think this represents a step into bringing a more, shall we say, quality focused feel to JetBlue in general, right? Do you think this will trickle down to the other routes that they operate, starting from the New York to London?
Well, being honest, I think it changes nothing
Mm.
because
Yeah.
Since 2000 when they started, JetBlue's always been a high quality airline with low prices, and they've had a lot of success on that. And I would expect a lot of people would think that they're going to be low quality, but no one really ends up ever coming away with
Right.
that
Right.
opinion
Right.
after
Right.
flying
Mm-hmm.
them. Uh, and there's some factors that I will probably discuss later that they're still not a luxury airline in any regard, and I don't really believe they're trying to be one
Mm-hmm.
because they've had their mint product for a while and they've had their economy is by any standard luxurious. You get tons of legroom and you get a ton of
Yeah,
amenities.
you get
So
what, live television and on-demand entertainment on every seat back, and as well as like free and fast Wi-Fi, right?
yeah, exactly. But the one concern I have, especially in being luxury, is that I don't think JetBlue is trying to attract the really high paying customers, and those would probably be the business people who would book expensive, probably business or first class tickets, but refundable so they can have flexibility. And they're probably not going to try to attract. They're not really doing anything to attract those. Yes, they have their Mint Studio, which is that it's almost like the residence where you have that one suite
Oh
in
yeah.
one A where you have extra space. Uh, but the two concerns I have with JetBlue is that one, they are not in any major alliance, and I'm curious what effect you think that has, uh,
well, I mean,
both on.
first of all, to not being in an alliance, I mean, the question we have to ask first is, has being in or out of an alliance affected JetBlue as of now, right? To which I would say the answer is absolutely no, right? It's not like, you know, JetBlue's main hubs in Boston and New York, right? They would gain certainly some benefits in having connections, to and from Europe, European airlines who fly to New York and Boston, and then can connect onto JetBlue flights to other areas in the United States, right? Or maybe even to the Caribbean, right? That could be a possibility. But the thing is, the thing is, JetBlue has a very, very, very specific market, specific audience, right? Which like you said before, since you said that, um, your concern is that JetBlue, effectively, right, the people who would help JetBlue out, or the people most likely to book these types of seats would be the business class people, would be, business travelers. I don't think that's certainly not their market. That's certainly not who they're trying to push towards. Since they do market themselves as a lower fare carrier, right? Flying to and
Mhm.
from Caribbean island destinations. So I think in that regard, right, not being in an alliance is actually it does no harms to them because they're not trying to attract the business travelers who normally depend on the alliance, who have Star Alliance or Sky Team status. I guess with this route to London, this would be more beneficial because it would allow connections to and from London and other, the worldwide network of London. But again, right, they're operating this flight just as, the UK is easing restrictions for travelers. These travelers, the first ones who are coming back, who are going to and from, London and New York, they're not business travelers, right? They're
Mhm.
mostly leisures, at least in this first stage of reopening. Not to mention the price of them pricing it at like $600 for a round trip. So I guess there's no harm to not being in an alliance, and uh, I guess maybe perhaps the costs of being in an alliance, right, are outweighed by the benefits for now. Sorry, that was kind of long,
Yeah.
but
Well, I was thinking. So on the point of is it going to change JetBlue's status as maybe more of a luxury airline? I think I had intended it as being in alliance likely would increase JetBlue's reputation as more of a global airline and one that you can connect to other airlines on, which would probably attract the more luxury esque customers. But I think the bigger issue is that they don't have lounges at all anywhere. And I was reading a point scout review on the specific flight from London to New York, and a major complaint is that the ground experience really isn't that great, especially if you book a mint ticket. You have this great experience on the plane, but you don't get any kind of lounge, which I know would be a major issue for business travelers at least. So I think when it comes to are they marketing themselves as a luxury airline, they haven't changed anything about the way they operate, and they're still very much leisure focused, but they have premium options if you want to pay for it.
I mean, like for example, that the one you read, was that by a business or a leisure traveler?
Well, it was a reviewer for the Points guy, so
Oh,
I guess it would be leisure, but you
no,
never
yeah.
know.
Well, I guess so. I mean,
Well, people these days are always claiming that their flights are their work. So
exactly. I mean, I guess the point does make sense, right? Not having lounges, especially when you try to market, the experience as a major factor. Not having lounges certainly takes away from that experience. But I mean, and to that end, right? Being in an alliance, having partnerships to allow to use other airlines' lounges would be good. But I don't know. I'm thinking. Well, my what I'm thinking, and what JetBlue is thinking probably as well, is that since they don't want to market themselves as one for the as an airline for the elite, right? They want to market it. They want to market themselves as the airline which offers quality but also good prices for the masses, right? So in that sense, not we'll probably not see a JetBlue lounge anytime soon, just because that would take away from their core message. And I guess in that same principle, having partnerships would also, you know, it would both take away from their core message of being an airline for the masses of quality and value, but it would probably also cause like a price increase because of the increased demand, right, from business travelers who now have the JetBlue option to connect within a partnership. So I mean, I don't know, does that make sense?
yeah, I think it does because in reality, JetBlue is coming into an ultra competitive market
Mm-hmm.
with, uh, I guess for reference, if we haven't mentioned this already, there's Delta, United, American, British Airways, and Virgin Atlantic all flying the same route
Mm-hmm.
in some sort of
Yeah.
fashion, and and when it comes to niches that need to be filled, in I guess in general, British Airways, Delta, United American are essentially the same. They're all often high priced, very loyalty
You know what
based,
you just did?
very
You
similar.
just offended all like super hardcore fans of all the airlines just now.
Well, no, admit I am a Delta fan myself, but on these international routes where there's a lot of competition, and even in the domestic routes that I flew from New York to JFK, there's very little differentiation between products, and it really is just
Hmm.
which airline do you have a preference for or have loyalty
Right.
to, and since JetBlue is a much different airline that obviously a lot less people in the UK know about, I but believe the CEO mentioned that the name recognition there is still very
Yeah.
poor. You have to fill a niche in some way, and the first thing people are going to notice is the
Hmm.
price. So if they have lower prices, that's probably a start.
Yeah. I mean, well, yeah, you did mention, like, for example, right, how well JetBlue is certainly a much different airline, but I want to read you I want to read you a quote from JetBlue chief executive Robin Hayes. Quote, actually, well, first of all, context, right? We're talking about the launch driving a price war between New York and London, right? With flights falling with prices for flights falling in general. Quote, JetBlue is responsible for that, right? So, we can clearly see the impacts just right away, right? The prices are falling immediately. Having a price war between this ultra competitive route market. So basically, even though, right, even though the name recognition in the UK is still certainly not great, JetBlue is not, you know, it doesn't have like much name recognition at all in in London and with services to London Heathrow. I think especially now that given this sort of price war that's going on with JetBlue and the introduction of lower prices, that will certainly be much more appealing to the masses of people who want to travel to and from New York and London. And I guess this having them as an option would also be a pretty good game changer, a pretty noticeable game changer within the market as well. Because definitely, like you said, right, the other airlines, they're mostly the same product. Um, so I guess again, this could be a big game changer in how people first of all conceptualize New York and London flights. Second of all, how people envision the experience, because again, right, the same product, it's not exactly super amazing, right? Um, but JetBlue is seeking to change that.
Yeah, they certainly are, and to the point where they have way less seats and really. I mean, British Airways and Virgin Atlantic are identical in essentially the product they offer because they have the same economy, essentially same premium economy, and they both have the reverse herringbone business class seats. And then you have Delta, United American are nearly all identical. I mean, United and American both have, I believe, like direct aisle access for every seat. And then I don't know exactly what planes Delta uses, but some variation of that, and potentially the Delta One suites as well. So there's a lot of similarity between the airlines, like you've mentioned, and JetBlue really is different because they have the 1-1 configuration in a much smaller, narrower plane, but also I think really sets them apart is their economy because they have way less seats, and way more legroom and a lot more benefits. And economy wise, I think that's huge.
Hmm.
Um, and I guess it's important to note that obviously when JetBlue was founded in 2000 and just started, they had massive disruptions on the industry, and not only price wars, but they many people believe that they were responsible for the growth of airlines like Song and Ted
Hmm.
that grew out of United and Delta. I guess flipped Delta and United. And I wonder if that's possible in this market now. Like, would we see British Airways and Virgin Atlantic trying to create spin-offs that maybe offer lower prices? Because of course, British Airways isn't going to be profitable if they don't charge high prices, given their margins being really slim
So I
usually.
think this is a good point, right? Where we have to take a look at another major question, which is the history of transatlantic low cost transatlantic flights, right? And to it, I would point out, you did mention like the the low cost carriers of Delta United, Songted. But I think that there's a more recent example, which has been, not great to say, which is Norwegian Air, right? One of
Mm.
the main reasons that Norwegian Air, didn't do great, right, in terms of the low cost transatlantic, the low cost long haul types of routes, as they call it, right, is it's basically because of what we hinted at before, the brutally competitive low cost transatlantic market, right? In this, New York to London is the epitome, right, of these sorts of flights. The airlines can effectively win in one of two ways. They can win on price or they can win on quality, right? The top airlines are obviously going for quality, but at the same time, when they're pitching flights to the masses, they're obviously marketing themselves as low prices, right? JetBlue is kind of trying to do both, right? Which if as history kind of tells us, maybe may not be so great, because Norwegian Air, right? They it's not like they didn't push prices extremely down, right? But it still ultimately didn't work for them, just because it's not cheap to fly across the Atlantic, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know. Well, because Norwegian Air, they didn't market themselves as a quality airline as JetBlue is. Um, so I suppose that if there is the niche enough market of people who are willing, of people who who well, obviously everybody desires low cost and quality, better quality, but I guess it's sort of, again, a niche market for people who are trying to, actually, I don't know. I guess it's an
Well, I would
interesting
say
comparison, right? To Norwegian Air, at least.
there is a lot of differentiation between the two because Norwegian flew Dreamliners for the most part, which are way bigger and much harder to fill.
Mm.
JetBlue is only offering, I believe, 114 economy seats and 24 mint seats. So that's 138 total seats, which is going to be probably up to a third of what Norwegian was offering. And two, JetBlue flies to Heathrow primarily first, which Norwegian, I believe, never did. So already JetBlue has more convenience and way less seats to fill, and and price wise, in that specific route pair from New York to Heathrow specifically, JetBlue will likely be the cheapest in economy. So they're gonna win the price battle, and quality wise, like I would say they're probably better than any of the competition, at least for the in air experience, because you have a very high quality mint seat, with literally every amenity you would get on say Virgin Atlantic or British Airways, and they're enclosed like before, like what they were before. So quality wise, they're probably the best there is for the in air experience. And then you have the economy, which I would say wins by a mile against any of the
Mm-hmm.
competition
Yeah.
because nobody offers free Wi-Fi. I mean, Delta does have some Delta Studio equipped planes with live TV, but like JetBlue certainly has the most options because they pioneered that. And then you have the extra legroom, which really no other airline can compete with because they're charging extra for their extra legroom seats, which is really just price gauging. So I would say that the comparison in a region is a lot different, and JetBlue's strategy has been successful because they aren't as, at least in recent times, they aren't as aggressive in expanding, and they're picking markets strategically. And clearly, there's demand for New York to London, and I don't think there's as much demand for say Stewart to Gatwick or whatever routes Norwegian would fly uh, to these smaller airports, because JetBlue doesn't have to fly to those smaller airports to make money
Mm. Yeah.
or to charge low
Yeah, yeah,
prices.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, for sure. That's I guess an extremely good point of how JetBlue is utilizing the A320 LR, A321LR, right? The narrow body plane, so that even worst case scenario, right? They don't have to fill an entire Dreamliner like Norwegian did, which was not great. Um, although I suppose I guess in that sense, Norwegian Air didn't have the A321LR to fly a lot of the routes, to and from, the UK and the US, right, and wherever else. Um, but yeah, I guess, yeah, I guess, they're really leaving themselves a lot of room, um, in case of error, because they're not putting themselves in a position where it's do or die, in case all goes wrong, eh?
Mhm. Well, yeah, and in terms of sustainability of the route long term and making money, the one serious question I have about JetBlue is so that they're launching service to Gatwick, I believe, at the end of September, and then they're aiming to launch service from Boston to, I believe, both Gatwick and Heathrow. But at least in September, and I believe the CEO Robin Hayes did say it was COVID related, but they are moving frequencies from daily to 4 days a week, and one day, one time a day is still low on the scale of frequencies because even during COVID right now, British Airways is operating 4 times a day, and if I recall correctly, there were some 40 nonstop flights across all the airlines pre-COVID. So what do you make of JetBlue serving the route 4 days a week? Like how is that gonna affect them in the long
Well,
term? Do you
again,
think?
it's them targeting a different audience, targeting a different market, right? It's British Airways flies four times daily because, well, first of all, demand is high in general, but also because a lot of that demand is concentrated in, again, right, business travelers need to have the perfect flight and all of that, right? JetBlue, I think, again, is trying to avoid that, right, and trying to go purely for the 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 more leisure travel market, the people who can only afford JetBlue fares as opposed to British Airways or United or whoever else, right? Um, so I would say that in by doing so, they're ensuring that they can fill most, if not all of their planes, well, all of them, right? They can fill close to all of their planes, and be able to have guaranteed demand, for those types of people, right? Again, they're not trying to they're not trying to charge more prices, just so that they can get more out of their customers, like the luxury airlines are doing with business travelers. Although I will say, right, since New York to London only 4 times a week, it is quite scarce even for touristy standards. Which I guess like you said, right, maybe because of COVID. So I mean, do you think like after COVID this will they may decide to raise frequency or?
Yeah, so what I heard in the interview was that this is COVID induced, expecting demand to drop in September, and maybe that's just because the holiday season is going to be ending.
Mm.
But so they obviously did want to increase frequencies over time. I don't know exactly what they're going to increase it to. I would hope it's more than 1 time a day, but you never know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean,
But it is interesting
mhm.
that the point that of course they can probably fill planes if they operate 4 days a week, but at least I know, maybe this is a flawed comparison, but public transit agencies especially are focusing very heavily on having as much service as they can, even if there's not going to be that much demand, because at least it creates a perception that they're always going to be there and reliable, and it at least brings people to using it more often. And if JetBlue wants to gain a presence in the long term, maybe it's smart for them to have a lot of service right now, because then they can capitalize on other airlines aren't offering much. So if JetBlue has the most, people will go to JetBlue in the future, and maybe that builds a sense of loyalty over
That
time.
is actually a very good point, right? So like how most, like even most with most low cost carrier, like, well, JetBlue's not a low cost carrier intrinsically, but with other airlines that offer low costs, right? They certainly don't have that perception of always being available. You have to actually, they only fly to and from select city pairs like maybe thrice a week, right? I guess, and in terms of JetBlue's case, the routes that they fly, they are certainly not, scarce routes, right? Boston to Seattle, New York to Los Angeles, right? Or even the touristy ones, they're certainly not scarce. So I would definitely agree, and that is I think that's a very good comparison of being in public transit, always having the perception of always being available. just so they can, even have people considering them, right? Even if there's no guaranteed, even if it doesn't, even if there are no guaranteed increased ticket sales at first, people will be aware of and will consider JetBlue as an option, especially in the UK, since especially since they don't have that name recognition as we talked about, but also because many people still think that the only options are American, United, Delta, British Airways, Virgin Atlantic, which are the same product as we discussed. Having people aware that JetBlue is adding, it has consistent service, right? Maybe it's once daily, twice daily, or whatever. That would increase people's perception of JetBlue even being an option, which is even for New York to London is something that's not guaranteed.
Yeah, I mean, I would expect that if they want to at least have the perception that, or at least because people after COVID are just going to go to what they
Yeah.
know, and if JetBlue isn't there during COVID, then they're probably it's like driving. Like if people aren't going to use public transit during COVID, they're probably not going to use it
Exactly.
after COVID. So
Exactly.
if JetBlue's not existing during COVID, then there's no really reason to go to them after COVID unless they know they're reliable, and that I guess comes from
Exactly.
experience.
I mean, after COVID is not, since we just got back from like, since we're recovering from like, this big disease, right? Now is not the time to go and explore other more risky places for many people. So having New York to London, I'd say, as you said, right? It's certainly going to be very fortunate for them to have that presence already.
Hmm. And speaking of presence, I wanted to shift slightly. So the one topic we haven't really mentioned as much is on their growth as a whole.
Hmm.
And so obviously JetBlue is intending to fly to Gatwick, and then they've made plans to fly from Boston to London. But what do you think in general about JetBlue just expanding more into Europe? Like, do you think it has potential, and what kind of potential do you think it has?
Well, actually, before I give my answer, what do you think? Because I, well, yeah, I'm curious what you think.
Well, I I would say that the market for I guess JetBlue flights from major U.S. cities like New York and Boston to smaller European cities or even big European cities is really, really high if they can
Really?
operate the A321 LR or Neo LR, at least because it gives them a lot of flexibility in where they can serve. Like they could fly from say New York to Porto or New York to I don't know Nice, France or whatever. They can fly to a lot of these very touristy destinations or smaller cities that most airlines really can't do if they don't have the right aircraft. So I guess the aircraft in particular gives them a lot of strategic advantage, and I believe they may have mentioned this, the CEO Robin Hayes may have mentioned that he had intended to grow more into some of the European cities and smaller cities. So I certainly think there's potential, but I don't know.
I'm gonna offer a different perspective to that because I think it's certainly I think it's certainly plausible, right? And the likelihood may actually be decently high that if New York to London turns out quite well, that they will be able to operate the same plane, the A321 LR, to destinations like you said, right? Nice, France, right? Or maybe even big airports like Paris, Charles de Gaulle, or Amsterdam Schiphol, right? The possibility is definitely there, and it's something which a lot of airlines have tried and tested. But I'm gonna say, for the sake of argument, but also because I think this is more the model they are going for, I'm gonna say they are using the In and Out burger type of model, which is, even though there are guaranteed profits to be made in new locations, in new markets, JetBlue
Hmm.
will hold off on doing so because in rushing too fast, there is a potential, and the likelihood is quite high in that case, that they will detract from their core values, right? Detract from their core values of offering
Hmm.
both quality and price, quality and value as opposed to other airlines which offer only quality or only low price, right? Like only good quality but very high prices, or only low prices but very very bad quality. I think if they were to, it's it's one of the reasons why, for example, even in JetBlue's domestic network, right? They only operate the flights to and from, Boston, New York, right? San Francisco, Seattle, Fort Lauderdale, right? They have the staunch, the most solid of solid, like, tourist destinations, as well as um, connections, right? They're not offering, for example, well, they're not offering, connections to less likely or less profitable routes, which is also sort of their strategy in the Caribbean islands, right? Where a lot of times they will offer, you know, where in a lot of cases they will offer, very very cheap flights relatively to and from, for example, New York, Boston to the Dominican Republic, or to St. Martin, or to St. Lucia, and they have guaranteed profits. But I think expanding to Europe, right, and through adding all those new cities, while it may be physically possible and while it may be physically profitable, it would probably detract from the core message of JetBlue. The core message of JetBlue, in that it would sort of create, how do I say this? It would sort of create like a growing too fast situation, right? Almost to the point of like Ryanair, where it's like, oh, new connections, more connections, more connections, low prices, more connections, right? And I feel like that sort of operation would honestly just it would, intrinsically, it would undoubtedly take away from the quality, because there's no way you can manage all the quality all that fast and all, on that large scale. um I think if New York to London goes well, it is certainly possible that, like, at least for now, right, one or two would definitely, in the near term future, it would be very likely. But to have the sort of connections that, for example, um to have the sort of connections that, American or Delta or United have, I think is certainly not something that we will see. But again, could be wrong. We might be seeing JetBlue flights to, Prague.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting because a lot of airlines, Qatar Airways comes to mind, have expanded quickly, but they've maintained extraordinarily good quality, and I don't see why JetBlue can't do that. But you make an interesting point that it creates this perception that they're probably losing quality. Like I would think a lot of people thought that with Norwegian or Ryanair too, that it's a very cheap no frills airline, and they keep expanding to new destinations, maybe looking for profit. And what's really key is that JetBlue generally has no name recognition at all in Europe, and maybe if they offer the only nonstop flight on certain routes, they could get demand. But if they're competing with other airlines, they need the name recognition immensely to succeed if they're not on very high demand routes, and that comes with quality. And I would assume that they would need to prioritize the path to the most quality. And maybe that is just conservative growth, and I guess that starts with, let's see how New York to London goes. Okay, then maybe we'll do Boston to London, and I would assume that the routes to the smaller cities come a lot later in the
Hmm.
future.
Yeah, I mean, even during the pandemic, right? Like Delta and United and American, they were operating, new connections to new destinations, new, for example, right, United began flights to and from Dubrovnik and New York for the first time in like 100 years or something, right? Um, which was primarily tourist based, but it it was United Airlines, right? They don't have that sort of, they didn't have the message of balance that JetBlue has. Whereas I think, as you said, right, like some airlines like Qatar Airways, they're able to do that, but JetBlue is really a pretty delicate balance, especially in, the New York to London one. It's a decent risk they are actually taking, because the last thing they would want is for them to fall and either become, you know, for the perception of them the perception of JetBlue to become either, a low cost carrier that just services everywhere with deteriorating quality, or even, an established carrier by the likes of United or Delta, that connects, major world large cities, right? And begins to lose interest in servicing the general public. So yeah, I don't think we'll be seeing many, the large scale operations anytime soon. I think, like you said, it will be a test, right? First New York to London, right? Let's see how it goes. Then let's see how Boston to London goes. Then maybe we'll see, New York to another city in Europe, right? Belgium or somewhere. And then yeah, that's why that's probably how JetBlue is going to function from here.
Mhm. Well, we've seen messaging shifts from airlines in the past, or at least strategy deviations, especially what comes to mind is Southwest. Now, literally flying to every other big airport that they didn't serve previously, like O'Hare, Bush Intercontinental, Miami, and also expanding to Hawaii, which is a massive change from what they did previously. But they still, in large part, have maintained their reputation as a low cost airline and still have low fares on many of the routes that they serve. Granted, many of them are not low fares
Yeah,
at all. But
if you
but
want to fly Southwest to and from Cincinnati, it'll cost you like $600. It's like Phoenix.
yeah, and but from a perception standpoint, I would assume many people haven't really changed their overall perception of the airline, and they continue to attract a lot of the same customer base. And I don't know how JetBlue would be able to lose a significant portion of the customer base, uh, especially given past precedent really hasn't shown that dramatic strategy shifts have resulted in dramatic business results.
I guess it's likely. It's not impossible that JetBlue is able to do that, right? Expand quickly, but still preserve their image. I mean, I guess what is for certain is that how New York to London turns out will be critical, right? As we said, in seeing how they can, and how this one route, again connecting to what we discussed before, right? How this one route may affect JetBlue as an airline in general, not just transatlantic, but through all the routes, through all their destinations. And yeah, so I mean, basically, as with any other topic, right? As with any other topic, we will just have to see how the situation panders out. Maybe JetBlue will have a massive transatlantic connection network. Maybe JetBlue will deteriorate, maybe in either its quality or in terms of its price. Maybe they will become the shining star and do what other airlines like Norwegian Air were never able to. Or maybe nothing will change at all, right? But for now, if possible, have an experience. See if you can get on the JetBlue new flights between JFK and London Heathrow, and it will from there we'll be able to see what the future holds for JetBlue.